going to go ahead and get started here. Did anybody not get a copy of the presentation that wants one? You snuck in later, didn't you? I saw you.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I'm going to scribble all over this.
You go right ahead.
Thank you.
Right ahead.
Enjoy it now.
Whoops. It's not going to be good if I stand in front of that. All right, so my name is Scott. Hello, come on in. And this is Patrick, and we're both from the Department of Education in Tallahassee. Being dumb, huh? Here you go, ma'am. Here's your copy of the presentation. I'm going to start out by talking about the McKay Scholarship, and then Patrick's going to close us out talking about the Gardiner Scholarship. Just as a show of hands, who is interested in McKay? All right, and who is interested in Gardiner? That's, lucky you. So that means my portion is going to be short. We're going to zoom through this and give Patrick all the time he needs.
Some of us don't know the difference.
I was
I know.
who has no idea?
Please raise up both hands.
That's kind of
Yeah,
how
both
I'm
hands.
kind of going to present it.
No, that's fine.
More of like
That's why we
how it
gave you
differs
a copy of the presentation, because we will kind of go through it pretty quickly, but you'll have that and you can ask questions during or after. We also have a booth in the exhibit hall. 506. It's pretty much right in the middle, right across from one of the essential oils booths. It's just kind of wafting at me.
I know that then.
Yeah, right. Some people like the smell, and some people are turned off by it. Any questions before we start? You're going to be on camera. You're getting videoed. Your voice could be on the internet for in perpetuity.
Well, I would like to know, when families don't have any of these ones, how to decide which one is better for them.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's largely going to be up to you. They may not qualify for both. There are different requirements.
Let's start with those.
It's just going to depend on your situation and what you're trying to do. Are you trying to get them into a private school? Are you trying to help pay for other services in addition to private school? What age they are? Do they have a public school record? Those kinds of things are going to determine which scholarship they might qualify for. Okay, well, let's get started. What do we got? Nothing. All right, so our office handles a lot of different things at the DOE, and these are some of the programs that we work with. But today we're just going to talk about McKay and Gardiner. All right, McKay. It's been around for 18 years. Started in the year 2000 with 2 schools. But today we've got over 30,000 students in the state of Florida that participate in McKay. So there's a lot in each county. Hello, come on in. And 1,480 or so private schools that participate. Now, a lot of your large areas, Orlando, Miami, Jacksonville, there's a lot of opportunity. Like in Jacksonville, there's well over 100 private schools that work with McKay. Now, if you're in a rural county, you may only have 1 or 2 or none options. But there are a lot of private schools that do this. All right, McKay is, it's called a scholarship, but there's not a cap on it like a traditional scholarship. There's no limited number of students that can qualify. There's just no cap, because basically what you're doing is you're taking the funding from the public school district and you are sending it to the private school. That's what you're choosing to use McKay funds for. So it's not limited like a traditional scholarship like the Gardiner that Patrick's going to talk about. There is a cap, there is a limit, only a certain number of people can qualify, but for McKay there's not. There's average amounts depending on your child's IEP or whatever. Now that amount is going to be used for any educational expense at the private school. It doesn't have to just be tuition. It can be used for uniforms, transportation, tutoring, therapy, graduation.
On the McKay?
On McKay.
Any of them?
Any of that, that's right. The private school is going to have a school fee schedule, they call it. And then when they enroll your child, then you've got a student fee schedule that's going to be choosing from that menu of options what applies to your child. And it can, any educational expense, it's not going to cover things like food, fun field trips to Disney World, or any like aftercare services or anything like that. Yes?
Is it gonna be basically the services that they receive in public school?
The level of funding is largely determined by the services received in public school. There's a couple other things I'll talk about later.
Okay.
But the private school is not required to follow the 504 or the IEP. Those are public school only documents. Once you take them out and put them in private school, it's up to the parent to try to find an appropriate facility that's going to do the services that you're looking for.
So if you have a private school that has, or in public school you're receiving speech or OT, it's a private school that does offer those services, but maybe also offers some ABA therapy, then would you be able to pay
Smaller
for that with it?
classroom. Oh, yeah.
Okay,
That's
okay,
right.
it doesn't have to carry on from just what you were doing.
No. Yeah, you can add, I mean, the scholarship's limited, you know, so it's not unlimited funding. But yeah, it can be used for those types of services.
But that is true as long as the tuition fee is less than your McKay, right? That is
That's
extra
correct.
funds.
That's what I was, yeah, it's not unlimited. So you kind of work with the school to decide what you want to use the funds for. Yes?
I'm kind of lost with what you're saying. Last year was the first time I used it for my son for private school.
Okay,
I just filled out the paperwork and then was called when I had to sign a check.
okay, well, that's
So,
good to hear.
in the school, he was receiving PT, but no OT or speech. I requested for speech to come in through the public schools,
Uh-huh,
but I was denied that because they just didn't have anybody to come to that.
sure.
You're saying that some of that funds could have gone for a private person to come in and do?
Through the private school. If the private school does not have somebody on staff that can provide that to your
Right.
child, then they would contract with somebody to come in and do that. Yep.
Why is it I was not told that? The whole funding went to them. And I couldn't. So there is a breakdown? How do I get this breakdown to know exactly what the school gets and what is left over in a sense? Is there something like that?
Well, you have your parent login. Once they're enrolled, you can log in and you can see the fee schedule. You can see what the school is charging, what the school is receiving,
No,
quarterly
mine
checks
never
from us.
came up with anything like that. It was just
Yep.
saying that I was qualified and
Yep, all that's available to the parent. And you work that out with the private school to use the funds to pay for it. There you go, that's right.
I had gone back in, but there was never anything showing up of any money that was dispersed or anything.
Yep, you also have access to see the checks and all that. Yes, ma'am?
A quick question. My grandson is in public school, but he's in a special program. And they did ask about the McKay scholarship. So, but if McKay's for private, why would a public school need McKay?
McKay can be used to get your child into a different public school than the one he's zoned for, or a different,
It can be used to get
it
him
can
into.
be used that, but all of that goes to the district. It's not a guarantee like the private school side is. I mean, if you qualify for the private, then you can use it.
Yeah.
You just have to find a private school that has
Right,
an open
right.
spot.
But how does it work in the public again?
In the public school, you would contact each district has a McKay administrator. You go through them and say, hey, I'm interested in getting my child into this school. I'm zoned for over here, but I don't like it or whatever. I want to try to get him over here. So you work with them to see if they have a spot for you over there.
And the McKay, they will tap
There's
into
no,
McKay to get
there's
him
no
in?
funding for that. It's just they're not paying his zone school. They're going to be paying his new school that you've chosen. There's no additional funding that you would receive like a
They're
check
paying
once
the
he's in
zone
private
school
school.
from the funds attributed to each student.
Correct, correct.
Not the additional funds
No.
or the funds from through a McKay.
That's correct. That's correct.
And that would cover transportation and everything for this child?
In a private school, yes, McKay funds can be used for transportation.
Really?
Yes, yes. I've had schools that maybe they don't have a bus, but they will use like city bus services to help pay for that, you know, because not a lot of the parents don't have a car all the time to take them to the school.
So go get one.
Well, here's the
Yeah.
question for you.
Yep,
I just moved from Illinois not too long ago. In Illinois, they actually contracted me to transport my son because they
Okay.
couldn't do it.
right.
Now, is that something that like the McKay Scholarship can do? Like you can
No, that's not,
contract through them?
no, not
Okay.
through, not for
Because
transportation.
they actually paid us to
Right.
take him.
Right, no, that's not.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Did the school or the scholarship?
No, the school, but he was in public school and he had to go out of district, completely out of district. So the school did not have a bus driver to take him, so they contracted with me to take him to school. So
All right.
that's what I was asking.
So there's 4 requirements for McKay. You gotta be enrolled in, as a public school student when you apply. You have to have a 1-year record of being in public school, being counted in those attendance surveys, the FTE counts. You have to be the right age, which means you gotta be at least 5 by September 1st. And then you have to have the appropriate IEP or 504. There's just 4 requirements.
I understand that you also can apply to the BPK as an ESE, no?
You can apply, if you're trying to get in as a kindergarten student, you can go through the SIS, the McKay program, and that'll come up later, but yes.
Do you know by chance how many days a child needs to attend that,
Oh, there it is.
the private,
That's the
the
next
school
slide.
private? So I had one that,
How many days, what?
that they have to attend public schools to be counted in their head count. So I had one child that was in and out because of medical,
Right,
problems.
right.
But needed to have one more day before they could
Right.
apply to be
No,
off.
I
I think
yes,
it's,
you
I
have to
think
ask
it's
the
a
district.
week in October and then a week in February.
Okay, yeah, and that's
But,
about
but
right. to me.
only the district would know specifically when that week
And this
was.
was in February, so that would make sense.
I think it's 11 days, 11-day window. Okay, so there are 3, talking about being counted as a Florida public school student, there are 3 exceptions to that. One of them, this lady was mentioning, was talking about you can qualify through BPK, through the specialized instructional services, instead of going the regular BPK route. Now, this is only for kindergarten, trying to get in as kindergarten students. The other 2 exceptions are for some military and for certain foster students.
It's active.
Active duty, if you're transferred to Florida, yeah. All right, so by April 1st or within 10 days of your child receiving the IEP or 504, the district is supposed to notify you. I was talking to somebody earlier. I don't remember if it was somebody here or somebody at the booth, you know, that district had just notified them. But they're supposed to do that every year. There's our phone number. All right, so if you want to see if you qualify, we have about 40,000 people that apply every year. Not everybody comes in every year, but there's a lot of people that apply. You just go to our website.
Can this hotline can help parents with advocacy issues, like
No,
informing
ma'am.
and educating parents about their rights and how to
No,
navigate?
not so much.
No?
No, they're more, how do I apply? What do I do if I'm approved? If I'm not approved, what can I do? Those kinds of things.
Do you have to apply for it every year?
No, ma'am, for McKay, you do not. McKay, once you're in, the private school just re-enrolls you every year until one of 3 things happens. McKay is good until one of 3 things happens. Either you graduate high school, you turn 22, or you return to public school enrollment.
So if you return to public school enrollment, if you went back out, you'd have to reapply again.
That's correct, exactly. So you go to our website and you would see this, click on parents, then the link pops up, you apply for McKay. And then there's like 5 steps, and this is step 1. Our system is gonna do a check for 2 of the 4 requirements. It's gonna check to make sure they're the right age, and it's gonna check to make sure they've got a public school record. If you got those, then our system will let you apply. After that, what happens is it goes to the district, and the district has 30 days to determine whether or not your child is eligible. The district will look at the 504 IEP to make sure it's correct and good for McKay, and they'll also make sure that you've got the appropriate public school record for the whole year.
What happens when you change private schools? You move your child from one to another one?
Yes, you're welcome to change private schools anytime throughout the year.
And you have to do something as a parent?
Not necessarily. There are 4 payments that we send out for the year for McKay, and each payment you have to be in school a certain amount of days, 10 days, in order for that school to earn that payment. So when you transfer can determine which school is going to get the funding. The private school withdraws them from their McKay list, and then the new school can just transfer them over. There's nothing that the parent does through our system necessarily. What's next? Yep, following an intent, if you enter your email address, then we will email you some information. If not, then we'll mail it to you. What happens next? It's what I was just mentioning. The district has up to 30 days to determine whether or not your child is eligible. And when you apply, you get a confirmation number that you can go in and you can check the status if you don't want to wait. All right, so if you're approved, the district says, hey, you're approved for McKay, you have two basic options. You can use McKay either to get your child into a different public school than the one you're zoned for, or a school in the neighboring district, immediately neighboring district. Or if you want to do the private school option, then you're welcome to follow up with the schools. We have a directory on our website. You can look to see what is available in your county or in a neighboring county, and it's good statewide, so you're not limited to just your county if you live on the border or whatever. And it's good, like I mentioned earlier, until one of three things happens. Either you graduate, turn 22, or return to public school enrollment. Now, returning to public school enrollment encompasses a lot of things. It could mean returning to your brick and mortar public school. It could mean registering as a Florida virtual school full-time student. It could mean taking the driver's ed class through your district. Anything that's going to count you as a public school student is a return to public school. Now the only, let's see, is that coming up? I'll go ahead and mention it, but I think it's coming up later. The exception, or whatever you want to say to that, it is McKay students can complete up to 2 virtual school courses per year without being considered a public school student. So if you're at a private school that doesn't offer physics, or doesn't offer a language, or doesn't offer something, driver's ed, you can take driver's ed for Florida virtual school. My daughter did it. She's driving me around town now. She's 15. So you can complete up to 2 per school year without being considered returning to public school. That's kind of
So 2 classes?
2 courses per school year. Now, for example, Algebra 1 is 2 semesters, but that's still only 1 course. Yes?
When it comes to the transportation under the public school system, how does that work?
Each district handles the McKay Public School option, so you'd have to ask them how it's gonna work. Sometimes they would provide it. I think a lot of times you would have to be responsible for that, but that would go through the district. You'd have to ask.
The reason why I ask is because my son, he goes to a public school,
Okay,
but we didn't do the McKay.
right.
They told me they don't accept the McKay there. So the way that we did was do a hardship.
Okay.
Would it be a good idea to do the McKay anyways, to have extra funds or how?
Well, there's no extra funding as a result of McKay Public. If you're satisfied with the public school he's in, then you would not need to do McKay.
My only issue really is the transportation.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's-
he's not, because we're not in that zone.
I don't think McKay Public is gonna help you in that regard.
Oh, okay.
There,
All right.
There is another scholarship that we're not going to talk about today, and you may want to research on your own, that can provide just a transportation scholarship. It's the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship, which we were talking about earlier, which can be used in a private school, but there's also a transportation scholarship that can be used if you're going to a different school in the public school system.
$750?
It's $750 now.
$750 a year for low income tax.
And then Florida Tech.
It's called the
Yes.
Florida Tax Credit Scholarship. Yep.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Now, you couldn't use that and McKay, McKay private.
Yeah,
But if you're only picking one
Yeah.
scholarship at a time, for all of these, you can only use one. Somebody, yes?
Students who drop a public school, use the McKay to go to a private school. Private school told me not to withdraw from the public school. When I enroll them in private school, do I still have to go to my school and disenroll them?
Different districts handle that differently.
Okay.
If they see that you're enrolled, because we tell them which students are enrolled as a McKay student in the private school. Sometimes they'll automatically withdraw you and switch you over to a McKay designation. So it just depends on the district. All right, what else we got?
What
Public
happens to
school.
the funds if at the end of the school year, the private school spent less than the amount that?
Then they would send the funds back to us. Yep. I touched on this earlier. The funding level is based on 3 things. What county you live in, there's kind of a cost of living adjustment to it. So if you're in a rural county versus Miami-Dade or whatever, the funding is going to be a little different. It also can change. Unfortunately, it goes down as you get older. I mean, tuition goes up as you get older, but McKay goes down. That's the way it is. Hello, come in. And then the other thing is the accommodations or the IEP information. That's going to be the main determiner of the funding.
I understand that if you're attending a private school, you still have the right to do the 3-year evaluation at your public school.
Correct. Every 3 years, the district is required to offer the parent of a McKay private school student a reevaluation of their IEP. It does not affect the funding. It does not give them an IEP necessarily because they're already out of public school. But it just is for the parent's information. How is my child doing based on where he was when he left public school?
Even if that evaluation shows progress and the kid will need the less resource, the amount won't change.
That's correct. That's correct.
Does that evaluation include testing?
I don't know. You'd have to ask the district. Yep, you're on camera.
Oh, I'm sorry.
For those that have come in late, we
So
have
sorry.
handouts of the presentation if anybody wants one. Patrick has them. All right, so you follow the intent. The private school enrolls you if you're interested in. And then it's not something that you have to apply for every year. If you're staying in the private school, they just re-enroll your child each year. You don't have to re-apply.
You're going to a different private school when you're.
No, ma'am. No. Yes, ma'am. So there is a state maximum, so to speak. Say if your child qualifies for $7,000, private school tuition and fees and all that is $10,000. You only get the $7,000, right? You don't get what the private school is requesting. That's what it means when it's talking about whichever is less. You have to meet certain deadlines to qualify for the payments, and you have to attend at least 10 days during each pay period. We do 4 payments for the year. The payments are made out to the name of the parent, mailed to the school. Parent goes to the school, endorses the check over to them. We do a random check of those just to make sure the parent is signing them and the school's not signing them or nobody's signing them. These are the deadlines. This is the deadline chart. So we have a deadline coming up. If you're interested in McKay for next year, then you need to file your intent by July 3rd in order to potentially qualify for 100% of the funding. You apply July 4th, then you've missed 25%. Yes, ma'am.
If you change your mind, so could I file an intent but then decide later that I didn't want my child?
Oh, certainly. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. When you file the intent, that doesn't withdraw your child from the district. It doesn't have any effect on their public school record. You're just saying, hey, I'm interested in this. Let's see what happens, how much funding I may receive, does my child qualify? And then you just have to decide after that if you want to enroll them by the deadlines. Yes?
So we're talking about McKay, I'm sorry.
Yes.
So if we're currently enrolled in McKay from this past school year,
Mm-hmm.
do I have to enroll and file an intent for
You
this
do not
coming?
reapply every year. No, ma'am.
No, I'm sorry, okay.
But the private school would need to re-enroll your child by August 2nd,
By August 2nd?
or you miss that first payment.
Okay, and what if I'm,
That's right. The school does the re-enrolling, and the school would not be sent the funding.
They missed it by 3 days last year, so I assume they didn't get the first check?
That's right. If they didn't meet the deadline, they didn't get it.
so it's the school's responsibility to re-enroll
The school does that. All right. The parent cannot do that. The school does that through our website.
So we need to make sure if the child is staying in that school that she was in last year, that is their responsibility.
That's correct. You are sent an email if we have your email address when the school re-enrolls them.
I can always
And you
call
can
them.
always check. You can always call us. You can always follow up, check on the school. No problem with that at all.
If we change schools,
Uh-huh.
that new school has to have her enrolled in that new school by August 2nd.
If that's the
True.
first one for the yes, if you've got one school from this past year and you're going to a different school for this new year, August 2nd.
No matter what school.
That's
It could be
correct.
the existing school you've been to or a
Mhm.
new school.
Or a
It
transfer.
just has to be August 2nd.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Yes, sir.
Does this apply anyway to public schools also, or is it only for private schools?
McKay is mostly used for help with private school tuition, but there is a McKay public option that I probably covered before you came in. It is on the presentation that you can try to get your child into a different school than the one they're zoned for.
Okay, and the payment option where like the check is sent to you will also apply for the public schools?
Well, there's no checks sent out if you're using the public option.
Okay.
The checks are only if you're doing the private school option.
What's the purpose of,
Yeah.
what's the purpose of the public option if you're not gonna get funds?
Well, it helps you try to get your child into a different school than the one you're zoned for, or one in the neighboring county. So if you're not happy with your school,
But how is this funded?
well, there's no funding. Yeah, that's what I said.
Isn't that
That's what I said
something
earlier.
the school district should do anyway? They don't have a program for your child.
Right, they have-
Direct
There
them
are
to.
several other ways you can.
Yeah, open enrollment
question
and
different public
yeah.
school enrollment and
All right, what else we got here? Transferring from one, you can transfer at any time. You can complete up to 2 virtual. I mentioned that earlier.
What if you're transferring
You can go.
the McKay to the Gardner? What happens to the McKay if you decide to
Perfect
go there?
question
Yeah.
for the transition.
Thank you for that question.
Okay, so now the Gardiner has a different set of eligibility criteria. So just because you're eligible for McKay does not mean you're going to be eligible for Gardiner. But if you are, you can transfer from one to the other. And you would default, because you're not coming from a public school, you may not have an IEP necessarily that's active. They would use your doctor's diagnosis, and I think we were talking before, you would default to a 253 as your funding level, and then you would have to request to have a reevaluation if you wanted to change that.
Okay. So, but if you decided to use the Gardner this year and decided that wasn't working for you?
You could go back, yeah.
Would you have to reapply for McKay again?
No, not if you don't, like Scott was saying, if you don't do one of those 3 things that causes you to no longer have it available, which would be, graduating, reaching the age of 22, or going back to public school. If you don't do those 3 things, you can still have it. You just can't use more than one at the same time.
I'm sorry, so, like, if I decide to switch to Gardner, those McKay dollars, like, I can go back to that and I don't have to re-enroll her through McKay? But I know I can't use both, I know you have to choose one or the other.
So you have to choose one or the other. It would depend on the timing of it. We do throughout the year several cross checks to make sure that somebody is not trying to utilize more than one scholarship at a time. So depending on when the cross check was done and how much money had been given out to one of the programs, some funds would be asked to be returned. So potentially we would ask for a percentage of the Gardner back so that you can use the McKay, or vice versa.
And did
It
I
just
understand
depends.
you right when you were saying to her that if my matrix is higher than a 253, it's automatically default?
It would default to a 253. Yeah.
Okay.
For at least the beginning. Now you can request a reevaluation, but there's always that sort of risk that you may get a lower score too. So you just have to keep that in mind.
So that's just the standard that Gardner says you get 253 no matter
If you're coming from McKay,
Yes.
Yeah, if you're coming from McKay.
So I have a question, because we're on the wait list.
Yeah.
We've been on the wait list
Oh,
for a
okay.
year. So we're using the McKay to enroll them in a private school right now.
Okay.
Because we're waitlisted and there's no guarantee that there's gonna be funding this year.
Mhm.
If I get a call from you guys or a letter from you guys that says we have funds, do I call up McKay and go, I'm dropping you and
Well, it wouldn't come from us. So as I get into more of a description of the program, we'll talk about how that program is actually implemented. The Department of Education provides the funding for it, but it's not actually administered by the Department of Education. It would be whoever your scholarship funding organization is. And we'll go over, we'll go over that in a couple, more than likely them, but could be someone else. So the Gardiner Scholarship Program, it's different than McKay. It's more like, if you guys know what a health savings account is, it's kind of like that, but just for education. So it allows you to more flexibly choose the education path for your child. So, and that can entail a lot of different things, and kind of, it's just an account that you can use to buy things that are eligible expenses, and that could be curriculum, that could be services, it can be a lot of different things.
Can you use Gardiner if you decide to do homeschooling? And
Yes,
pay for the
absolutely you
tutors?
can. hmm
What was that?
Home education.
Mom, is this
So it started, it's a still fairly new program. I think every year until this year they changed something about the program. Well, they may have changed something this year, but not anything consequential for this presentation. But it came about in 2014. It was known as the Personal Learning Scholarship Accounts Program. Looks like we missed a word on the slide, but that was the first year, 2014. Since then, it has been renamed after Andy Gardiner. And there are about 10,200 students currently. This is as of last week when we pulled the numbers on Gardiner Scholarship. And every year they do an appropriation for this. So like with McKay, Scott was saying they have, as long as you're eligible, you get it. With Gardiner, there's a set amount of money every year. When that money runs out, there are no more scholarships for that year. Usually what ends up happening is we use all the money, but then people do something like go back to McKay, or they don't use it, they decide they don't actually want it, they stay in public school, and then those funds are returned, and then what we can do is reissue scholarships to other students. So that's why it's important that if you want it, apply and get on the wait list, because there's always potential that you can still get it.
How do they pick and choose?
It's a first come, first served. Yep.
When does it open up each year?
You can apply at any time, and just depending on when you apply, you'll either be eligible or you'll be on a wait list.
How long is the timeline that they'll determine whether you're eligible for that coming school year? So say you apply, and then is there a set number of weeks, or do you just go in and check to see if you're in a pending status?
It would
Is that
it
how
would
works?
depend on the scholarship funding organization, but checking with them would be a way to find out if you've already applied, and I'm fairly certain they would send you some sort of correspondence.
They email
I just
you,
don't
and
know
they send you a
exactly.
notification to check your thing,
Okay.
and it states right in there whether it's pending or if you need more stuff. It tells you right in there
Oh, okay.
online.
So as far as the funding, it is not, so if you had the equal rating for the funding amount in McKay as you do in Gardiner, so if you came from McKay to Gardiner and you were a 253, but you were also a 253 in McKay, you would actually get less on Gardiner. A lot of people think that it's a given that you would get more money on Gardiner. That's not necessarily true, but what is true is the Gardiner is designed for very specific diagnoses, and those diagnoses tend to be a higher funding amount. So because of that, you may get more in Gardiner, but if you had the same funding and the same rating in the McKay, you would actually get more in the McKay. So you get 90% of it. The McKay is 100% of FEFP for a student. Gardiner is 90% of that. But it's also based on, just as all students in Florida, public or private, the FEFP generated depends on the county, the grade level, and the matrix, which is what is determined by the disability rating.
I don't know if we can, but I was surprised to hear that with McKay, everyone who applies gets it because it's the dollars you would have spent in public schools being redirected somewhere else.
Okay.
So how did it happen that with Gardiner it's not the same? Because if my child is withdrawn from the public school, why do the dollars that would have been his in the public school not follow him wherever I want him to go?
you know?
That's a good question. That would be a question for your representative. Yeah, each of these choice options has been passed through the legislature, and I couldn't tell you why they are the way they are, but they are all different. They're
Well, it's just
administered differently.
frustrating in certain circumstances where there is not another brick and mortar school choice option available, and needing to go to home education and, you know, in-home therapies and things like that, I get waitlisted because there's just not enough funds to do it. But if there were a McKay school that could take my dollars and provide the supports available, then, so it's just a frustration I'm dealing with, but I will definitely keep my word on.
So it's 10,000 for all the students that they give dollars to.
That's an average. That's just an average.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a range. I think it probably goes from something like 7 or 8 up to 20. I'm not sure the exact range.
Is that dispersed in 4 payments too, just like the McKay?
No, it goes into an account. All the funds go into an account, and you can use the funding in that account to pay for certain things.
So what do you do? Submit bills or?
You would have to submit, an invoice to your scholarship funding organization
It's just you have more flexibility with
on what
Gardner.
you can use it for. So McKay, it's very clear. You can
It's
either
very
use
clear.
it to go to a different public school, or you can use it to help pay towards tuition at a private school. With Gardiner, and there'll be a slide or a couple slides that'll tell you what the eligible expenditures are, but it's a lot of different stuff. You can go to a private school still, and you can do home education, but
But you need to have the money in advance because it comes first from out of your pocket and then you get a reimbursement.
yes.
It can be, I think, right?
It depends on the timing of when you're getting the funding. But those would be questions for the scholarship funding organization that you're getting the scholarship from. So as I was saying, there are very specific diagnoses that would qualify you for a Gardiner Scholarship. This is the list. I'm not going to read them all because you guys have them.
High-risk child, what all fits in that? 'Cause we're looking
A
at
high-risk-
medical diagnosis.
Yeah, so a high-risk child, I think they did change that a couple years ago, what that actually meant in terms of the scholarship. But it would be a student that is, I believe it's a 4 or 5-year-old student that comes from some certain circumstances. I don't know the exact definition, but it's something that I know they changed specifically for purposes of Gardiner a couple of years ago. So that would be something to check into.
That's like the catch-all, I always like that.
Yeah.
vague.
It's got a specific
We're looking at
definition,
medical
yeah.
diagnosis, so that's why.
I have a quick question. So, it's okay. If they have, so you were saying that it varies by amount. So if they have more of these items, that if they're multi-disabled and several on the list, does that mean that most likely they're gonna get a little more to be able to pay for the therapy?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. It's you still get funded based on your rating. The matrix score.
You're gonna go over that later, right?
Well, I can't tell you exactly because they do that every year. The funding amounts are determined through FEFT every year in July.
I was just asking, what is a matrix score?
Right.
It's
Okay.
when you get your IEP and you decide
Correct.
how disabled you are and
But
what services.
one big difference, that is correct. So it would be, if anybody didn't hear that, based on an IEP, you would receive a matrix rating. But also with Gardiner, you don't have to have an IEP necessarily. You can have a doctor's diagnosis.
But then you get the default,
You would default to
right,
250.
the default is 253.
Well, we have an IEP, so I'm not overly worried about that.
There, if you look on your IEP or ask the district to tell you what your matrix is, it's either in your IEP or you find or you can tell you your number.
Yes.
Nobody. Sorry.
You still have a question?
Hearing loss and visual impairment's not on the list. They didn't take
Oh,
that off.
this is not the whole list. There's the rest of your list. Yeah. So the administration of the program, I've hinted at it a lot, maybe even outright said it. It's not administered by the Department of Education. We send the funding from the Department of Education to a scholarship funding organization that has been approved to administer this program. There are currently 2, and there will be 2 for this upcoming school year as well. It's the Step Up for Students organization and the AAA Scholarship Foundation. It's the same scholarship. They also administer other scholarships, but it just depends on which organization you want to go through. Whoever you feel more comfortable with, you can call and talk to both of them. It just depends on what you want.
I understand that Step Up also has scholarships for kids with reading problems.
So that's gonna, yeah, we're not gonna talk about that today, but there are going to be other programs
Okay.
that are gonna work with.
Can you use both?
No.
Like reading?
A reading
plus-
scholarship, and this is not really the scope of the presentation, but that's for public school students, only 3rd and 4th grade or 5th grade public school students that get a certain score on their ELA
in the
assessment.
federal-
Yeah.
in the federal-
Say that again,
find out
what is that?
information about that.
It's gonna be on our website, so that the reading scholarship accounts program, which is, again, we don't really have any materials on that today, but it was just passed this past legislative session. It's a brand new program, and it's going to go into effect this coming school year, but it is not a program yet. It's still being implemented right now.
Step up for students in the exhibit hall.
What?
Step up for students in the exhibit hall.
I don't
Yes,
know.
they
I've
are.
not
Yes.
been in there yet.
So
Actually.
that'd be a question for them.
Yes.
So is Step Up and AAA, do they mirror each other? They are?
I don't really know how to describe the differences between them. They're different organizations, but they are approved in the same capacity to administer this program. So you can, these are just kind of the things that you can or can't use the program for. As we discussed, you can use it to pay towards tuition in a private school. Just like you can with McKay. I mean, it's a different process that you use. You don't get a check sent to the school and then you go sign it. You actually, the funding comes out of your account. But you can also use it in a home education program, and we'll go over some of the services that you can pay for with it as well. But you can't use it in a public school. You can't use it if you're on another program, like McKay, and you can't use it in VPK program.
So if the child is in a public school, can you not use this to pay for services?
No. But they can get services from the public school if they have those services.
I thought if you enrolled in Gardiner, that you all will service.
Oh, he's asking. He said, yeah. So he asked if he could use it in the public school to pay for services. The answer is no. You can't.
The public schools already provide
If they already provide that, yeah. Now you
You
can.
have the public
can.
do therapy, correct?
Yes. So there are contracted services that you can use Gardiner to pay for in a public school, and I think it's on. Yes, it's on one of these. This slide or the next slide. So
The
this
slide
is
before that, it talked
Yep.
about being with
this one.
home education.
Mm-hmm.
When I did it last year, I remember that I was jumping through hoops to find out how to do these things. How do you notify them that you're doing home education?
There's a district representative you can call and talk to,
Yeah.
and
No.
they'll walk you through.
So yeah.
Oh, okay.
There's every school district has a home education office. Being a home education student is a very specific thing. It doesn't mean that there are things you can do at home that are not home education. Home education means that you have registered with your district home education office by sending them an intent, which is just a written notification. And then you have to keep a portfolio of all the work that the student does.
And how do they get acknowledged as that? I mean, does the district provide a teacher to come in and check on you? Or how does that work?
To be acknowledged as being in a home education program?
Yeah.
Well, you can use, so one thing that they would require, each SFO would require evidence, some evidence type. So that's up to them to determine. It may be different what Step Up is asking for than what AAA is asking for example. But for a home education program, I think what they would ask for is a copy of the intent or a copy of the evaluation, something like that. But those are the things you have to do home education, regardless of whether you're doing Gardiner. You have to do an evaluation every year, you have to be registered, and you have to keep a portfolio.
So you're saying the qualifications on the Step Up and the other one are two different qualifications, not the same?
No, I didn't say that. I'm just saying that the evidence type for what they have to have a document of some type that shows that they are not in public school any longer. If they're in home education, that document could be something provided by the district home education office. But you would have to contact.
Not a letter from me saying, yeah, I'm in.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. So these are some of the things you can use Gardiner for. Again, I'm not going to read them all, but you guys, if anybody doesn't have a sheet, let us know, and we have a couple extras.
Just going back to my, so these services that you just talked about, occupational therapy, physical therapy.
Yeah.
I mean, this is by the provider. And if I want to get like extra speech therapy or occupational therapy sessions for my child, but the child is in a public school, I could not use this.
You can't use Gardiner. Gardiner is not a public school scholarship. It's a scholarship to either use in home education or to use.
So I'm saying outside the school, if I want getting him services.
Additional services.
Additional services. No. Is that?
So, okay, so maybe, I don't know if this is your question, but say my child's in public school and they're getting their services in school, but I want more on her, and I go to a provider, my own speech therapist provider.
Okay.
Your insurance should be paying for that.
I think
And if I have a
insurance
$50
or even
copay
Medicaid or something,
something,
maybe
copay,
maybe
yeah,
able
go
to
through
pay for it.
and use Gardiner.
CMS would not coordinate those extra services.
Yeah.
with your insurance.
Okay.
CMS coordinator. But using the
Glad
insurance
you
to pick it up.
glad you came.
For outside, that was, of course, now a lot of times the child's actually in school and what could have spent by the time they get home from school.
Sure.
But that's an option.
Or you can apply with the school to get more services.
Right, and that's the other thing, you can always ask to
I
have
know.
your IEP amended to get more services if your child's needing them, so that's always an option too.
Okay. One of you.
The ABA is not really provided at school, and you don't get approved CMS, so is that different type of partner for ABA therapy?
So I mean, you can use it for APA therapy if you're eligible for Gardiner.
Even if your child is in public school?
Not if they're in public school.
Because they don't give ABA in school.
No.
Then you would have to, like she was saying, you would have to find another way to pay for it then.
Our insurance pays for ABA, which is
Yeah.
CMS.
Oh,
CMS
okay.
does pay for our ABA.
And then at that point, you may want to revisit your IEP and see about having it amended to increase the services based on your child's progress, where they're at.
You're saying that they don't offer it at yours, so you may look into a neighboring school or something as well.
Right, and that's when the McKay Scholarship would come in handy,
Yeah.
where you can go to a school outside of your district.
Or some ABA providers will do a push-in service at your public school. It depends on the provider, I think.
And your district.
And your district.
And the principal.
And the principal.
Yes.
What about an example where you have the McKay Scholarship and he has a certain amount of money and the tuition is less than that?
So I think Scott went over this in his McKay presentation. So McKay pays up to a certain amount. If your tuition at the school is more than that, then you would have to you would have to pay the difference. If it's less than that, then they only get that. They only get that much. Yeah.
I couldn't use that extra.
I mean, it doesn't. There are probably not that many schools that their tuition is less than that, because if they know that, then they're gonna make their tuition more. But, yeah.
Can you use Gardiner to pay for, like OT, PT, ABA that doesn't take your insurance? So you have insurance, you can, and you are eligible for Gardiner. Are you allowed to use that money for it?
So are you asking what he's asking, like if you're in public, if the student is in public school?
No, if you're
Or if you're in home
saying-
education or in private
Right.
or something, then yeah. Yes.
Some are Gardiner providers.
They can be a Gardiner provider even if they're not gonna take your insurance.
They don't necessarily have to be a Gardiner provider because I use the Gardiner Scholarship for my son's OT, and as long as she's certified, they need the billing number, they need her license number, and the Gardiner approves that. So it depends on your situation. Every case is different.
good question for your scholarship funding.
It is.
Okay. So yeah, these are just continued expenditures that you could use it for. One thing that's probably important to bring up is the Stanley G. Tate prepaid college program. So you can, if you're not finding it necessary to use all the funding for things now, then you can make contributions to use for college later. And then contracted, what we were talking about, contracted services to the district as well.
How do you, because that's one of the district is, well, not the district, but the school is like, oh no, you can't do that, but the teachers, the therapies are telling me, yes, you can. So how do they get paid through the district?
Well,
I know that's
through
kind
their,
of a-
I mean, if they have a contract with the district, it would be in their contract, that contract. But if you were
Like,
using
because I need
Gardner funds-
services through the school that are not provided in my county for therapy. So, both of the therapists have said, yes, they will do it if I end up on the Gardiner Scholarship.
Mhm.
They're not the problem. But the school's like, well, I don't think you can do that because it's part of the public school. So, I mean, I know it's allowed.
You can.
It's under the ESD department
Yeah.
of your school.
Okay, so I need to go to the ESD
Yes.
department and take care of it there.
And they can draw up a contract for you.
Okay.
But if you go to the school, the headmaster or mistress, they are sort of like gatekeepers, so they may not give you access. But if you go to the ESD department, they can draw up a contract.
No, because I can even go to a technical homeschool and not go to their school because of it, so.
But they can draw up a contract.
Okay, so I just need to go to the
You
ESD
just have to
department.
make certain that once they draw up that contract, they cannot enroll you into the system because it's
Right. Right.
Oh, and we have a few more. These were so Florida Hospital was already on there, but the last three were just added 2 years ago, I think.
We're talking horse therapy, they can.
Correct, horse therapy, but they would have to be a member of the Professional Association of Therapeutic Horsemanship. Same deal with the music therapy and the art therapy. They have to be a member of those organizations. They have to be credentialed.
So if the riding program by us is a member of the Professional Association of Therapeutic Horsemanship, then they'll take the Gardiner.
Correct. Well, yeah. You can use.
Well,
You can be
they
reimbursed
invoice
for.
me.
Yes,
I can pay them,
using Gardner funds.
right?
Mhm.
Or if they want to invoice them, the provider as the riding stables, if they want to invoice Gardner directly.
It would be either Step Up or
Yes,
yeah.
yes, gotcha,
And
okay.
it's super, super easy, because I do go to a horse therapy that does it, and she says it's extremely easy to do on her end, just so you know. So if you're like, it's really hard, it's not really.
Yeah, okay.
Just so you know.
Thank you.
Sounds great. My son is there something available for him?
To remain in public school.
Yes.
So the only thing that would be similar would be the reading that we were talking about, and that's only for very specific grade level students that perform low on a reading assessment, and you can use it to pay. It's not very much. I think it's like $500 or something. You can use it to pay for like tutoring or reading, help with reading. That's the only thing that's similar.
How come they have this? I mean, it's not your fault, but anything.
Again,
Such an amazing program for private and
and they're gonna improve because 4 years ago we didn't even have Gardner.
Right.
18 years ago we didn't have McKay. What did we have at that point? I don't even know. So, I mean, they're constantly trying to improve the programs we have, coming up with new programs, and I don't see that changing. So, just keep monitoring it. You never know.
The need, they're seeing the need,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Well, that's the big picture, because it was with Rio that rolled out to try to get everyone with disabilities to be able to work and do something productive in life. They're pouring a lot of funds now at the DR level at age 14 for the children. So this they help prepare them to be able to enter that and do something.
What was the Florida hospital?
Yeah, what?
I don't know specifically what services will be provided, but that would be the provider of a hospital in the state of Florida.
The provider
Of whatever services that you were getting. I don't know if it could be medical or whatever. That would be a question for your SFO.
Totally lost, okay. What's the SFO?
That's the scholarship funding organization.
So
That would be
it's
Step
oh,
Up
Step
or
Up.
or AAA.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But I think there's something that we really need to mention is that Step Up is not for medical. It's
Correct.
an education-based program. You know, now, as far as hippotherapy or something like that, or OT, if you were to be on the scholarship, you've got to make certain that it addresses the educational need of the child, although it's being medically addressed. It always has to be steered in the direction of education.
Yeah. Or else they won't approve the
It will
expense.
not be approved. It's education-based.
All right. I think we're good. I think we're done. We have more presentation that is not geared for this. Yeah.